It's really something to see these startups, right? They just like explode onto the scene and they're hitting these like huge valuations, becoming unicorns. We're talking billion-dollar valuations, making headlines. And then, well, things go south. And that's exactly what we're diving into today, the story of the Good Glamm Group.
Yeah, they were, what, valued at $1.2 billion just a few years ago?
Exactly. They even had the title of South Asia's first D2C beauty unicorn. And yet, reports are now suggesting their valuation has crashed down to about 120 million. I mean, that's quite a fall from grace.
It's a huge drop. Definitely makes you wonder what went wrong. Like, how do you go from a billion-dollar valuation to, well, to that?
Exactly. And that's what we're here to figure out. We've got some fascinating sources for this deep dive. We've got a video transcript from Backstage with Millionaires, a really in-depth analysis from Inc. 42 titled Good Glamm Group's Bad Formula, and then a pretty blunt article from the Morning Context called The Good Glamm Group Isn't a Pretty Sight.
So a good mix of perspectives there.
Yeah, and our aim is to use these sources to understand what happened. What were the key missteps? What lessons can we all learn from this roller coaster ride? We want to give you, the listener, a clear picture of what went down and why it matters. So let's go back to the beginning.
All right, so back in 2017, they launched as MyGlam. And the sources all point out that they were entering a really hot market, the online beauty sector in India. It was booming.
Totally. And they actually saw some early success, right? Their revenue in 2017, that first year, hit 13.7 crore rupees. For a new D2C brand, that's pretty impressive.
It is, but revenue doesn't always tell the whole story. And that's where things get interesting.
Oh, yeah, because the Backstage with Millionaires video points out a major red flag early on, their customer acquisition cost, or CAC.
Right, their CAC. They were spending something like $15, which is about 1,000 rupees, just to acquire one customer.
And that wouldn't be so bad if their customers were spending a lot, but...
But they weren't. The average order value back then was only around 750 rupees, so they were losing money on every single order. I mean, that's not sustainable, is it?
Ouch, yeah. That initial revenue figure makes a lot less sense when you consider they were basically paying people to buy from them. Definitely not a recipe for long-term success.
Not at all. But the Backstage with Millionaires video talks about their so-called genius plan to solve this problem.
Ah, yes, the content-to-commerce strategy. This was the brainchild of their founder, Darpan Sangvi. Essentially, the idea was to ditch those expensive traditional ads on Google and Facebook and instead create their own content to organically attract customers.
Smart, right? Articles, tutorials, all that good stuff, all centered around beauty. The thinking was, if you can get people engaged with your brand through helpful content, then they're more likely to buy your products later on and at a much lower cost.
Yeah, it's a pretty compelling idea. The video even mentions that this wasn't a completely new concept globally, but in India it was pretty fresh and innovative.
For sure, but anyone who's tried to build an online audience will tell you that it's not easy. Creating all that high-quality content consistently, it takes a lot of time and effort. And that's where their next move came in.
The acquisition of Popso.
Bingo. May 2020. Popso was already a big deal in the digital media space, particularly among women. They had like 60 million monthly visitors. A ready-made audience.
Talk about a shortcut to getting eyeballs, and the Backstage with Millionaires transcript really makes it seem like it was a perfect fit on paper. MyGlam needed that audience to lower their CAT, and Popso, well, maybe they needed a clear path to making money from all those visitors.
Exactly. Content-driving commerce, it's a classic combo. And the impact was pretty dramatic. Within a year of that acquisition, their website traffic shot up from 30,000 to 250,000 monthly customers.
Wow, that's incredible growth. And their CAC?
Dropped to just $1, from $15 to $1. I mean, that's just massive.
So from losing money on every order to potentially turning a profit just by acquiring the right platform.
Yeah, and this turnaround caught the eye of investors. 2021 was a big year for Indian startups getting funding. And armed with their content-to-commerce success story, Sangvi went out and raised some serious cash.
Right, they secured a $71 million Series C funding round, followed by a $150 million Series D just 4 months later.
And that's how they became a unicorn. A billion-dollar valuation. South Asia's first D2C beauty unicorn, no less. You can really see why they thought they had cracked the code.
But as we know, it wasn't all smooth sailing from there. Their ambitions didn't stop at $1 billion, did they?
Not even close. The Backstage with Millionaires video mentions that Sangvi set his sights on a $10 billion IPO by 2023.
Ambitious, to say the least.
And to get there, they plan to acquire even more brands, setting aside a whopping 2,000 crore rupees for acquiring 4 to 6 new companies.
This is where their house of brands strategy really kicks into high gear. They rebranded from My Glam to the Good Glamm Group, and they built the company around three pillars. It's a pretty common strategy, where a parent company acquires and manages a bunch of separate brands. The idea is to share resources, cross-promote, and basically create a powerhouse of different brands all working together.
Yeah, each brand caters to its own little niche, but they all benefit from the bigger group's structure and resources. In theory, it's a great way to scale quickly.
Right, but the execution has to be flawless. And in this case, well, we'll get to that. Tell us about those three pillars.
Okay, so they had the Good Media Company, which was all about content. This is where the Popso acquisition, along with others like Scoop Whoop and Miss Malini, came into play. Then there was the Good Creator Company, focused on influencer marketing, building brand trust, and spreading the content further. And finally, there was the Good Brands Company, which was home to all their D2C brands, both the ones they developed themselves and the ones they acquired.
So they were basically trying to create a sort of online version of those big FMCG giants like UL, right?
Exactly. But they wanted to do it much faster, leveraging the speed and reach of the internet.
And to make that happen, they went on a crazy acquisition spree.
Crazy is the right word. They bought up tons of content platforms and D2C brands, the Mom's Co., Sorona, Organic Harvest, the list goes on. And the Backstage with Millionaires video and the Inc. 42 analysis both really emphasized just how much money they were throwing around.
And this is where those cracks in the foundation really start to show, right?
Yep. So in FY23, they did see huge revenue growth. They hit 600 crore rupees, a tenfold increase in just 2 years. But their losses were even more dramatic. They went from losing 43 crore rupees to a whopping 917 crore rupees.
917 crore? That's mind-blowing.
It's a lot of money. The Backstage with Millionaires video mentions they burned through something like 2,200 crore rupees in those 2 years, and a big chunk of that was spent on all those acquisitions.
That's just not sustainable. It's like building a house on, I don't even know, on clouds.
The Backstage with Millionaires video actually compares it to a pyramid scheme where you need constant new money coming in just to keep the whole thing from collapsing. And once that flow of money slows down, well, you've got a big problem.
And it seems like their content strategy, the very thing that was supposed to save them, also started to crumble.
Yeah, remember how crucial their content platforms were to lowering that customer acquisition cost? Well, the Backstage with Millionaires video paints a pretty bleak picture of what happened to those platforms after they were acquired.
Like, take Popso, for example. They've got a huge YouTube following, but the video mentions they haven't posted any new harm-form videos on there in ages. Even their short-form content is apparently getting way less engagement than before.
And the video suggests a big reason for that is the huge rise of independent creators in India. Between 2020 and 2024, the number of creators just exploded. Suddenly, Popso was competing with all these individual voices, and those voices often felt more, I don't know, authentic, relatable.
Yeah, it seems like Popso just couldn't keep up.
Yeah, they were up against this massive, ever-growing wave of creators who were just much more in tune with what audiences wanted. And while the Good Glamm Group was busy buying up more and more companies, their main content engine, Popso, was losing steam.
And even their founder, Priyanka Gill, ended up leaving the company.
Exactly. And it wasn't just Popso that struggled. Scoop Whoop, which used to be a big name in the content game, also took a hit. But their story is a bit different.
Right. The video explains that they got caught up in an internal crisis. Back in 2022, their CEO was accused of sexual harassment. He resigned, and a lot of the original Scoop Whoop team left with him.
Yeah, that definitely hurt their content output and, naturally, their viewership.
And then there's Miss Malini, another content platform acquisition, and another case of declining relevance.
The video mentions their content started to feel kind of stale, not as fresh and engaging as what those independent influencers were creating.
So the core of their content-to-commerce strategy, the very thing that had initially made them so successful, was basically falling apart.
Pretty much. And that, of course, had a knock-on effect on their brands, because if people aren't engaging with the content, they're not getting exposed to the products.
And then the founders of those D2C brands that they'd acquired, they started leaving too, right?
Yeah, the video specifically talks about the Mom's Co., Sorona, and Organic Harvest. The founders all exited after the acquisitions were completed.
And the Inc. 42 article also highlights that, plus it mentions these allegations that the Good Glamm Group actually changed the product formulas of those brands.
Right, and supposedly that led to a drop in product quality, which then led to negative customer reviews.
Not good. Not good at all. It really makes you wonder if their centralized approach, taking control of things like sales and hiring and marketing for all these brands, was actually hurting them.
It definitely seems like that might have been the case. If you take away the autonomy of those individual brands and their ability to innovate and respond to the market, it's going to have consequences.
And then there was their push into omni-channel retail. The Inc. 42 report really dives into that and how it put even more financial pressure on them.
Yeah, they spent a ton of money on getting premium retail space in high traffic areas. They were paying huge visibility charges to make sure their products were front and center.
It sounds expensive.
It was, and the Inc. 42 article points out that this strategy didn't really align with the positioning of all their brands. They were also doing these crazy discounts, like selling products for just 1 rupee.
1 rupee, serious.
There was basically a fire sale. And that kind of deep discounting, it doesn't exactly scream premium brand, does it?
Not at all. It kind of makes you think they were getting desperate, and it seems like their offline retail efforts didn't really pan out.
Nope, they end up shutting down most of their own stores and scaling back their presence in those third-party stores.
All of this, the failing content strategy, the struggling brands, the failed retail push, it's no wonder they ended up in a serious cash crunch. Both the video and the Inc. 42 article talk about delayed salaries and trouble paying vendors.
Yep, things were definitely getting messy. And on top of all that, there was also a lot of turmoil within their leadership team,
Right. The video mentions that 2 of the 3 co-founders left.
leaving Darpin Sungfi as the sole founder still at the company. And it gets worse. The Inc. 42 article details the departure of a bunch of senior executives, including their CBO and the CEO of their beauty business. Even some board members resigned.
Wow. I mean, that many resignations at the board level, it raises some serious questions about how the company was being run, doesn't it?
Absolutely. The article even brings up allegations that the company might have misled international partners and exaggerated their growth projections to investors.
So, yeah, not a great picture. And now they're facing a really uncertain future.
To put it mildly, they're reportedly having trouble raising new funding, even at a 90% discounted valuation. That's $120 million, a far cry from their billion-dollar glory days.
And Inc. 42 mentions they've got a default notice from the AM and legal notices from others because they haven't made payments for those acquisitions.
There are even reports that Sanofi is trying to sell some of those companies back to their original founders, and at much lower prices than what he paid for them.
It's starting to sound like a desperate attempt to just stay afloat.
It does, doesn't it? Inc. 42 does mention a possible new funding round led by Veloce FinTech, but it seems like a long shot. There are a lot of conditions, like bringing in other investors and using a big chunk of the money to pay off debts. And even if it goes through, those new investors would end up in the 70% stake in the company.
So even if they get that lifeline, the current stakeholders will lose a lot of control.
For sure. And the fact that they're also selling off assets, well, it just shows how dire their financial situation is.
It's crazy to think that amidst all this chaos, they still went ahead and launched their WYM beauty brand in the U.S. with Serena Williams as their partner.
I know, right? It makes you wonder about their priorities. Inc. 42 actually questions what their board of directors was doing during all of this. Like, did they really think launching in the U.S. was a good idea when the company was struggling to survive in India? Where was the oversight?
It's a big question. So the big question now is, can the Good Glamm Group actually recover from all of this? Or is this the beginning of the end?
It's hard to say, but they've got a really tough road ahead of them. I think their story is a cautionary tale about the dangers of growing too fast, especially through acquisitions, without having a solid foundation in place.
Absolutely. So for all of you listening, what can you take away from this deep dive into the Good Glamm Group? We've seen how their initial content-to-commerce model showed real promise, but then their aggressive acquisitions and their inability to adapt to the changing content landscape led to their downfall. And of course, those leadership challenges and operational missteps didn't help.
Right. The Backstage with Millionaires Byju calls it a case study in what not to do when building a company. It's a reminder that growth for the sake of growth is meaningless if you're not building a sustainable business.
Exactly. So here's a final thought for you to consider. In the fast-paced worlds of D2C and digital content, what are the core principles that businesses need to stick to? How can they avoid falling into the same traps as the Good Glamm Group? And how important are strong leadership and good governance in navigating these ever-changing markets? It's something to think about as you observe the business world around you.